Hello, my name is Laura Moriali. I'm an independent scholar and a medievalist, and I work here in Washington, D.C. Today I'm going to begin my presentation on transcribing together with IIIF and from the page with a brief description, my description of transcription. Transcription is the act of transferring, in the case of medievalists, handwritten information from a manuscript or a digitized image of a manuscript to a keyboarded or machine-readable version of that same material. In transcribing materials from medieval manuscripts, we are rendering a new version of a text or manuscript that is suited for the ways we now consume and manipulate text in the 21st century. Now, today I'd like to talk about how this can be done in a classroom setting, and I'll do so using this example of the Cronica Pisana, a 14th century history of Pisa in a manuscript now housed at the British Library. I'll cover why transcription is a good activity for the classroom, how students might react when you ask them to transcribe. I'll look through one way to structure the assignment, some of the learning outcomes, and finally the takeaways that students might have from this particular exercise for the future. Now, from the page is the transcription platform that I use for research and teaching. You can see here how the platform works. There's an image on one side of the screen, then a space for transcribing on the other side. From the page has a very shallow learning curve. Most anyone can start transcribing within a matter of minutes of signing on, and it tracks workflow almost effortlessly, and then it keeps all those images, transcriptions, and other information about your project in one place. It's really a great tool. One of the drawbacks is that it is not open source, but it is now supported by a number of institutions. So I would recommend that you reach out to your institution if you would like to undertake transcription in your classes. Now, if you're an independent scholar like I am, you can purchase an individual researcher account and then take that account with you wherever it is that you teach. Now, from the page is great because it integrates IIIF images quite simply. And here I'll just run a little demo for you. You can see that all you really need to do is to find a IIIF manifest, then copy it and paste it into the screen under the Import a IIIF Manifest or Collection tab. Then you load it up, it loads up directly, and you're ready to transcribe right away. And you're transcribing from a very high res image, which can be crucial when you're working on transcribing. So let's talk a little bit about why transcription is so great in the classroom. When I create a transcription assignment, I always choose a manuscript I've not previously worked on before because I like this to be an unmediated exercise, not material that I thought up somewhere else, but rather an activity that we as a class work on together, one that medievalists and of course other humanities scholars participate in often. Students then have the chance to see how that real work gets done and that they too can access or have access to some of the raw materials of our practice. And because the students and the instructor are partners in this effort, it really breaks down some of that teacher-student hierarchy that can at sometimes get in the way of learning. It allows us to work through problems together because we're all in it together. Now we're gathered around this text, this one manuscript, working through it together. And as we do so, students engage with the material on a very deep and personal level. When you're working with a difficult reading of a manuscript, doing so word by word, or letter by letter, and sometimes even stroke by stroke, students start to dig into the material and they're challenged to think creatively about how to make sense of what's on the page. It also encourages critical thinking about the sources, and I'll mention a little bit more about that in just a bit. But perhaps most importantly, working so closely with materials created by another human or another group of humans who left their mark so personally on this text, it allows for a very human and a personal connection to the past in what I would argue is quite an enduring way. So what are the reactions that students will have when you first introduce the assignment, which is probably quite different than many that they're used to? This is what you'll hear. I don't know how to do this. Or this text just goes on forever. We'll never finish it. And my favorite, which is, well, I don't read Latin or Spanish or Italian or any of the languages that, that we work in as medievalists, certainly. And so therefore they say, I simply can't do it, which is really, really not the case. By way of example, I will say that none of the students in the class that that transcribed the Cronica Pisana that I'm going to be talking about in just a moment had any Italian at all. But by the time that we were done, they had figured quite a lot of it out. And so it was a really great way to engage them even in the language learning process. And I would encourage you to reassure your students that language competencies aside, they really can do this. They really can, look at something on one side of the screen and write it down in the other. And that this exercise, particularly as it is structured, provides an entryway into understanding material that otherwise would probably remain rather impenetrable to them. Furthermore, by the end of the transcription effort, they too will be an expert, maybe one of the world's few experts on this person's graphic style. The metaphor that many people use who work in paleography is that encountering a new manuscript is like meeting a new person. You have to get used to the quirks and to the idiosyncrasies, and you start to know this person, to come to see where he or she is positioned vis-a-vis this text, how he or she is relating to this particular story in his or her own way. And we find that through what he or she or they have left on the page for us to find. So now I'm going to take you through how I actually structure transcription assignments. The first thing to do is to start students off with a very small selection of text, depending how compact the hand is, maybe 15 or 20 lines. And I always tell students that this will be the most difficult transcription session that they're going to undertake, because they're still just getting to know the hand, getting acquainted with the scribe and how the scribe does things. So students will take this small selection and they'll make their way through as best they can. They will need to have the first effort done and then back to me at least 24 hours before we all come together, whether virtually or physically, to discuss the manuscript. And you can see here in the middle pane of this slide that the student has submitted his very first attempt, and then I was able to come back in very shortly thereafter and make corrections. And those corrections appeared side by side with his own. So he was able to compare and to discover things that were difficult or confusing for him in this very first pass through. Now, once we've all done our first session or first effort at transcribing, the next step is for the whole class to come together to talk about the manuscript, to find the keys, to unlock what's difficult or unique about our particular manuscript. We'll talk about characteristic letter forms, about the abbreviations used, the options that we might have for expanding them, issues of punctuation or word separation, things like that. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, we'll talk about what remains unresolved, what the problems that we are encountering, what they are. And I find that if, or rather when, I admit that I don't know what something means, it's very empowering for the students that in fact not knowing what something is a normal part of the process, and that we can all work together to find a solution to this question. And so it's at this point that I provide students with some of the tools that we might use to resolve those questions that are remaining. Now, these are the ones you can see here that I use for the project that I'm talking about. It's a dictionary of medieval Italian. There's a paleography tutorial. There's the Capelli, which is a reference work for abbreviations. And then finally, a quite specialized source, the Encyclopedia of Medieval Chronicle, that of course would be helpful as we try to decipher this 14th century chronicle. And then finally, if we've looked in all the correct places, all the normal places, I say, well, just Google it, right? Just throw it out into the internet and see what comes back. And what I want to stress here is that in this exercise, and of course I say this to the students as well, there's no way to cheat when you transcribe. You can look at your peers' work. You can look at my work. I want you to look at my work, and look, you can look anywhere else that might help us to solve the problem. And then in fact, doing so is not cheating. It's what we call research. And this, I think, is really where the critical thinking component comes in, where students should begin to ask, how authoritative is the resource that offers a solution to my problem? Can I trust it? And more importantly, can I get my teammates to trust it? What argument might I make to my team members to convince them that my solution for this problem is the right one? Students might even have to go out and look to other resources to make their case. And I think that this is just a great way to encourage critical thinking and, of course, how to amass evidence to support one interpretation over another, which is what we do in humanities research all the time. So it's a great exercise in that way. Now, once we've all done our first small selection, I'll divide up the rest of the transcription into chunks and give each student their respective chunk. I use a transcription log. It's just made in Google Sheets, you can see here, and that's a centralized place to track who has done what on the project, what's been completed, discoveries, reactions, unresolved questions, and obviously a little bit of encouragement from time to time. And it serves as this kind of textual meeting place where we keep track of the project and we sort of keep track of each other, right? Who's doing well, who's having problems, those sorts of things. Now, once each page has been transcribed, it's got to be reviewed. And of course, for each page, the transcriber and the reviewer have got to be different. And this facilitates some really great peer-to-peer teaching. And of course, I'm always involved in this process. Students are going to see my work, they're going to review my work, see the errors that I make, and perhaps in reviewing my work, they might pick up something that they didn't catch in their own pages, and so they'll go back and fix it and whatever. But it's really great to see this kind of interaction between students and the teacher and each other, right? And, as I said before, they're always going to need to enter those unresolved questions into the log sheet because another student may have encountered the same problem on the way and can offer some advice or a eureka moment and say, oh, no, I figured that out myself, and this is the answer. And of course, that really creates that great community working together on this one project. Now, as students begin to hit their stride with the manuscript, as they invariably do, the project participants should all start talking about the editorial norms that they would like to adopt for the particular edition that they're creating. So we're going to start asking questions like, what kind of an edition are we making? Is it a semi-diplomatic edition? Is it a critical edition? What are we doing here? And what should we do with all of the sort of things, the problems that come up, right? With Arabic and Roman numerals, with chapter headings and rubrics and initials and marginalia and brackets and braces and all the kinds of things that we encounter when we see handwritten texts. And as students are making these decisions about the kind of edition that they themselves are creating, it teaches them that the same kinds of decisions were made about many of the other printed texts that they encounter outside of this class. And that other scholars, other editors, other publishers, for example, may also or certainly intervene to produce the kinds of things that they read and they're used to reading outside of our class. So I think it's a really great way to underscore that. So what are the kinds of things that you're going to hear during the exercise, which in fact reveal what they are learning? I'm not going to read all of them, but you'll hear things like, well, why is the scribe, breaking this text up in paragraphs? Are they really paragraphs? Are they sections? What are there? Oh, and then, so why are there different colored inks? What does that mean where there's more than one person working on this manuscript? And then, of course, really the most important one is you start to hear some really personal reactions to what's on the page. So they say things like, oh, well, this part here was just amazing, and the text was beautiful, and it was great, but that P thing that he does is just so annoying, and I hate when he does that, or I hate when she's doing that, or I hate when it shows up like that. So you have that really human connection between the transcriber and the person who created this text so long ago, and that's a wonderful experience, I think, both for everybody, right, as we're going through. So now once you've fully transcribed your text, you can use it in any way you would like to. Now, for this particular project for the Cronica Pisana, we did a collation of our manuscript with a different version of the text, which was based on another manuscript witness, and this was printed. The other version was printed in the 18th century. our manuscript happened to feature 24 extra lines not found in that printed edition, and it was listing the names of dozens of Pisan inhabitants who had perished in a flood in the earlier part of the century. And of course, the students were very excited to be able to then contribute that information back to the story of this particular text. We also went through the text and tagged the different ways that the author marked time in this particular chronicle. And of course, you can mark your text up for whatever questions that you might have, and that's quite easy to do in from the page in the platform. We were then able to export that data to Google Sheets and then to visualize it in a really simple graph format that allowed us to see that text in several different ways and open up a different set of questions that we would not have been able to do otherwise. So it's very simple, just tag and export that data. Now, I'd also like to add that I've been inspired recently by discussions, particularly in our field, about questions of race and questions of cross-confessional questions. And I would argue that bringing something like this Harley, the trilingual Psalter here, bringing this to your students and suggesting that they might want to transcribe part of it, the part that they can transcribe, and then be able to look at this interrelationship between different kinds of hands and different kinds of languages working cooperatively might be a way to open up some interesting questions that we all would like to bring to our students at this time. So that's just a different way of thinking about transcription. Now, in terms of enduring interest, in terms of whether or not people want to do this past my class, the transcribing process, I will just mention that for many people, transcribing becomes something that they really enjoy. And I will just briefly mention a series of transcription events that I participated in and I ran this summer, which involved nearly 70 different scholars who all came together to transcribe multiple versions of Gorodati's La Sfera with no real tangible reward, just the fun of transcribing along with others who were doing the same thing. So that's kind of an activity that I think stays with people, that joy of looking into the past through these texts. So I find transcription to be an effective and an enduring classroom activity. And with that, I will close. I'll thank you for your attention and certainly invite anyone who's interested in this activity to contact me with your questions or your concerns.